Welcome back to the Tracer Podcast, everybody. I'm Joey Wilson, one of the co-founders of Tracer. And to introduce my guest today, I've got a little story to tell you all. I signed up for my first ski mountaineering race called the Wasatch Powder Keg a few years ago, and never done something like this. I've grown up skiing, and I'm a pretty good technical skier, but I was going up the skin track on the first climb, and we got to this place where there was this bottleneck. There was like a really steep, icy section that people couldn't get through because the uphill skin track where people were going was really messy, and people were sliding out, people were falling down. And this guy I hear comes up on my left shoulder and just blasts through everybody and like skips through it and kind of steps up. And they say, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," because they thought he was on his first lap, but he had already done a lap and was passing everybody for the second lap. And he turned around and he's like, "I've already done a lap." And they're like, "Oh, okay, you're going the right way." And on he went, and he went on, I believe, to win the race. Later, maybe a couple of years later, I was going up another skin track at another time here in Utah, and I was pushing it. I'm not pushing it, but I was moving pretty good to what I'm capable of. And these two guys were behind me, and I could hear them talking, and they were way down there at the bottom, and a little bit went by and they were closer, and they were just chatting. They were having like a totally easy conversation. Let's say they were very conversational, and they caught up to me, and I was kind of huffing and puffing, and I turned around, and it was Adam Loomis, my guest here today. Turns out he's one of the fastest ultramarathon runners in the USA, and also one of the fastest skimo racers. So I was getting caught by a pro, catching up. So Adam, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hey, thanks, Joey. Quite the intro. I haven't actually won powder keg. I wasn't in the lead either, so
Ooh,
I must have been moving fast, but still not look what I was like. Knew what I was doing, so they thought I was a beginner. But
yep. You
yeah,
skipped right by me, and I didn't even know, like like I said, I've grown up skiing. I didn't even know on skins what you did was even possible until you did it right in front of me, and I was like, no way that guy just went up that thing right there. Because it was icy and nasty that year. I think maybe you had to have been top 3 that year.
yeah, I think I was right there. Yeah,
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Well, maybe just so people know who you are, let's go over I'd love to go over some of your accomplishments as an athlete. Obviously, we've already said one of the fastest skimo racers in the United States. For those of you who don't know what skimo is, it's really fast backcountry skiing, really racing, going up and down um, mountains. Basically, it's like trail running racing, but on skis and skins. And Adam is a legend around here in Utah, but nationally one of the fastest racers. Um, you recently won the Tushars 100K, the Gorge 100K in trail running, a second place at a very competitive 100 miler in Colorado, Run Rabbit Run, a winner in previous years of the Bear 100, and one of the fastest times on the leaderboard there. I think one of the top 10 fastest times overall on that course. Winner of the DC Peaks 50, a new race that's right outside my house, actually, in Davis County, Utah. Winner of that in 2023. And then also one that I found out about that I didn't know about you, set the fastest known time for the Whirl in 2018. Is that right?
yep, yeah. That was my first summer really in the ultra space, and still one of the best experiences I've had. That FKT has since been obliterated, but it was a good time.
Yeah. So just shed some light on what the Whirl is, and maybe we don't spend too much time, but tell us what the Whirl is. I think a lot of people in Utah knows what it is, but if you're not from Utah, give us a rundown of what is the Whirl.
Yeah, so WURL stands for Wasatch Ultimate Ridge Link Up. It's a Jared Campbell creation to some extent, I guess, in terms of putting it together in one day. And it's this really aesthetic horseshoe around Little Cottonwood Canyon, where at the top you have snowbird and Alta. It's about 18 miles, but it tends to, no, sorry, 30 miles, about 18,000 feet of elevation gain. So it takes, and really technical terrain. It takes about as long as 100 miles for a lot of people. Um, but I love scrambling. I like being on sharp ridge lines and using my hands. And I don't love navigation, so it's perfect. You just follow the ridge line and keep moving. Um, yeah, it's pretty iconic here. I think outside the Wasatch, even it's got some recognition too.
Yeah, I know Alex Honnold is a good friend of mine, Tim Jones, and does a lot of video work for Tracer. He's involved in Tracer. He put together a documentary of the world a few years ago that was a big hit, and had Jared himself talking about it. And I know Alex Honnold is a alum of the
Hmm.
whirl as well. But it's a very technical. The thing that kind of stands out to me is that you've done skimo racing, you've done Nordic skiing. That's another thing we didn't talk about. You have a background in Nordic skiing,
Yep.
but also very technical. Like in some places, if you fall, you die. Type of like speed scrambling on the world. Like
Hmm.
this is not an ultra marathon. It is an ultra marathon, but it's a different kind of ultra marathon. It's even it's way more technical than hard rock even, let's say.
Hmm.
So it strikes me as kind of an interesting color to your personality that you would be successful in all of these different disciplines. Which
Yeah.
one of these stands out to you out of all these accomplishments that I've mentioned? What stands out to you as being significant for either positive or even it could be negative? But what's like a give us a couple highlights on these races that you've done or these accomplishments.
Um, yeah, so I guess to touch on, my background was in Nordic combined, ski jumping and cross country skiing. And I do think that set me up pretty well because of that endurance aspect of cross country, but also the mental and technical element of ski jumping,
Mm.
which was actually quite a challenge for me. I mean, I took Nordic combined higher than I might have thought, and I was on the national team for 6 years, but um, when I look back at my Nordic combined career versus now in my ultra running career, I think I struggled more. Like I had more bad days, more bad jumping comps or races, even though I had some great days. So I think now to be racing in trail and ultra, I still have some tough days, but like my my average is a lot higher in terms of like days I'm psyched on, which has been it's been cool and it's been a little bit surprising. And I think some of it's just the level is really high in our sport, but you can go to a regional race and like feel good about yourself. When you're competing in a sport like Nordic Combined, you're competing at World Cup or maybe World Cup B, so like you don't get that opportunity necessarily. Um, so
So
that said, I think, oh, you go.
is the difficulty that you're mentioning of the combined,
Hmm.
is it the intensity of like throwing yourself off a ski jump and the scariness of that, or is it the just getting a beat down from world class athletes? Like what part of that?
Yeah, I would say it's a little more the latter. Yeah, I mean, I competed primarily on the World Cup circuit, so yeah, like the best of the best, which is really cool. And I've experienced that a little bit in trail and ultra and skimo, but it's not like every weekend.
Mm.
Um, and then ski jumping, it shouldn't be scary, or you're really not going to make it far. But it's a fast twitch, like highly technical sport that's like yeah, it's like golfing at high speed. Um, so
Is there a mental element that you've learned
oh, for
something
sure.
from
Yeah,
ski
yeah. I
jumping
think
that you've brought into your ultra marathon
yeah, I
running?
think and that's kind of where I'm getting to. I think that I learned to, trust in the process and sometimes even when the process didn't work, embrace the process, even if it didn't bring me where I wanted to be. I still had a lot of fun along the way. Um, and yeah, I think that's something that's carried over to what I'm doing now. The mental aspect from ski jumping, the endurance aspect from cross country skiing, it did set me up pretty
Interesting.
well.
What advice would you give to somebody that you've learned from ski jumping and from that era of your life, for but break it down for an everyday person, somebody who is not competing against the the world's best. They're
Yeah.
competing for themselves. They're the Joey Wilsons of the world who just want to do their best for them. And yeah, what could somebody like me learn from what you've learned with ski jumping and those kinds of things and the mental aspects?
Um, I mean, ski jumping is interesting because it is like the original extreme sport. Um, but it's actually pretty safe. It's pretty controlled relative to some of the extreme sports, and it's a progression. So you learn to just progress, check the boxes to where you're able to step up to a bigger hill. You learn this when you're really young. That okay, I progressed past, the smallest jump. Now I can move up. But then when you move up, you have to have the confidence that like, okay, I got to do what I did before. So I think, yeah, I think you'd learn the progression. You learn things that look really scary. I mean, everyone's watched the Olympics and things. That's terrifying. Like, how do they start? You start on a small jump, just
Mm-hmm.
like anything else. It's chunk it out.
Mm-hmm. What led you to get into this arena of endurance sports and combined Nordic? I know you were born in the Midwest, but
Yeah. Yeah.
what
So I
led
grew
you
up
from
in,
your childhood into this?
yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I was pretty into cross country skiing just from like my parents getting me into it at 7, 8, 9 years old. And we had a little youth program, nothing, anything like we have out here, at the time at least. And then actually I watched the Salt Lake Olympics and
Mm.
learned that Nordic combined was a sport. And we had a local club. So then I was able to put those, I think my parents saw a little bit of Daredevil in me, and thought, yeah, ski jumping could be a good outlet while he still gets to do his cross country skiing.
And did you enjoy cross country skiing as a 7 year old? Because most 7 year
Yeah,
olds that I know, including my own kids or myself, probably just don't have the patience for endurance on a sport like cross country. So, why'd you enjoy it at that age?
gosh, it's hard for me to remember, but I do know that like before I did Nordic Combine at like 9 years old, my parents were like, "What are we gonna do? Like, we don't have a real program in this town. Like, do we need to move to another town?"
Hmm.
Um, and then actually we ended up starting a high school program, like my group. So that became an outlet. But yeah, some kids love it at a young age.
Well, that's a great intro to some of your background and your accomplishments as an athlete. Um, every conversation we have here on the Tracer podcast is intended to help our listeners to learn how to be better endurance athletes themselves. Um, what would you say you've learned from Nordic skiing that could be applied? Well, maybe before I ask that question, I should point out what you're doing now, which is you're doing a lot of trail ultra marathons. I mean, we went over your list of recent wins in 100Ks, 100 milers, and 50 milers. Um, and obviously your success in skimo racing. But what have you learned from Nordic skiing that trail runners don't yet fully understand, or maybe you don't see it as common knowledge in trail running that you learned from Nordic skiing that maybe where trail runners are missing the boat on?
That's a good question because I think that's a conversation that Nordic skiers, former Nordic skiers that are now in the running space, like to have.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think that there's a culture in Nordic skiing, and I was lucky to have really good coaches growing up and on the national team that really based training in science and then explain that to their athletes. Um, and I think, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist in running, but I think it's a little bit of a stronger culture of that in Nordic skiing. I think some of it is that we don't have pace is completely irrelevant for Nordic skiing. Like I guess in the advent of Strava, every once in a while somebody will say like, "Oh, you were skiing whatever 3 minute miles," and I'm like, I literally never looked at that. And
Hmm.
also, it's a mile in Nordic skiing. Everything's kilometers. But yeah. So it's simple stuff that runners do know, and I think the science in running is catching up for sure. But I mean, the biggest thing is, yeah, doing your easy days easy, doing your harder days hard. It's super simple, but I think that cross country skiers tend to do that better. Um, they also tend to cross train because you're not cross country skiing year round. You're roller skiing. Roller skiing's not that sweet. And you're able to do a lot of hours. So you learn that if you train right, you can really build a big base, and do a lot of different things. And that you got to be specific at times, but it all adds up. And I think that is a little bit different than runners counting miles, looking at pace, and kind of rarely looking at like how many hours they did in the week. It's more about miles and pace.
Would you go by time if you're looking at your total training load getting ready for a race? Would you prefer in that case? I mean, it's the same thing in trail running, right? Like a 15-minute mile could be really slow. It could be world class. It just depends on where are you running that mile, right? Is that a
Yeah,
15-minute mile straight up 1,000 feet? Well, it's world class then.
right.
So I remember a time I told somebody that I had to run a trail marathon that had 7,000 feet of vert. And I think I said my goal was under, it was like 5 or 6 hours or something. And they're like, oh yeah, so pretty slow then. And I was like, hey man, come on. I mean, slow for Loomis. Yeah. But, slow for the rest of us, maybe not. Like, let's see you do it. So yeah, to your point, like pacing kind of doesn't matter when you get on terrain, anything with uphill or downhill, that starts to fall off. Certainly
Right.
applies in road running. Do you prefer to train by time when you evaluate your load, or what metrics do you like to use?
Yeah, I like to look at time. I do. I kind of look at time, distance, and elevation, which really distance and elevation are going to turn into time. When I'm looking at it from like macro view, then I'm definitely looking more at time. Um, I think there is a little, like I've got a little sucked into it, and like because our races are so long that if you're matching the vert, especially yeah, as I'm trending towards longer races in ultra running, not schemo, but the miles matter maybe a little bit more, at the on the longer end. But at the same time, yeah, at the end of the day, I do like to say the body knows time. Like if
Hmm.
you're whatever running through knee high grass and you're running twice as slow, like you're getting the the load for that whole time.
Yeah. It, would you say the zone that you're in metabolically is more important than your pace when you're training? Is,
Yeah,
is that
100%.
essentially what you're saying?
100%. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
do think, um, back to Nordic skiing, you know, some of our places we train and, I used to race are pretty challenging courses, but at the same time, it's not as varied as mountain running, skimo. So if you're, an elite Nordic skier, you can ski easy anywhere, anytime. So I think that is another advantage.
Because the terrain is flatter. Is that what you mean? Like you
Yeah, I
can kind of
mean,
stay in
again,
an
it's
easy
definitely
zone?
not flat. Yeah, definitely not flat, but it's not like all of a sudden a 40-degree pitch like you might have mountain running.
Right, right. Yeah. It gets harder and harder to stay at an easy pace, at a truly aerobic pace, the steeper the terrain gets. I
Yeah,
mean, you find yourself taking teeny little steps and barely moving. At least I do.
right.
So let's talk about how you might prepare for a very short race. And when I say very short, it's still really long because I mean we are talking endurance sports here. We're not talking about 800-meter runs. We're not talking about 400-meter races. We're talking about, in your case, if you go do a skimo race, it's all out for an hour and a half, on a typical race. Depends on obviously the distance of the race and the exact race. But let's just say somewhere in that maybe half marathon effort where, depending on how fast you are, it could be an hour, just over an hour, could be maybe up to 2 hours. Let's call that, for the sake of this discussion, a sub ultra distance, a fast race. How do you, how would you advise people to prepare in general in training distribution, in the intensity that they run and how they put their workouts? Give us an idea of what it looks like for Loomis to help you get ready for a short race that may last an hour to 2 hours.
Yeah. I think from a distribution standpoint, it's not going to look that much different from training for something longer. The 80-20 adage of 80% easy, 20% at intensity is applicable. I mean, like you said, this is all aerobic. Even if we were talking about a 30-minute race, it's still aerobic.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the same time in an hour and a half race, you're definitely finding that top end of your zone more of the time, and you want to be comfortable with that, and you want to push that a little bit. So I think skimo complements running really well in this sense because it is a higher intensity zone than I'm finding in most of my summer racing. So in the winter time, that's when I focus a little more on the zone 4, 4-minute type intervals, and using that as an opportunity to bump up my VO2 max level. Whether or not my VO2 max itself is going up isn't necessarily the point. The point is how fast can you go closer to your VO2 max. And then when you do that, you're prepared to do a shorter race because you're comfortable pushing harder. And that's something in the ultra space where sometimes it's like you go do something short after not doing it for a while and you're like, whoa, this is really hard. I forgot what this feels like. So you don't want to come into an A race like that. But it still carries over because now you bump up your zone 4, that efficiency, it's a ceiling that everything else follows. So it kind of sets you up for any other race quite well and building throughout the season.
Do you recommend that as people train, say they're not skimo racers, most of our listeners are probably trail runners. Okay. That's kind of the center of our audience. And then of course we have some bikers listening. We have some road runners listening. We have some skimo people listening. Do you think for somebody who's not skimo racing, who's a runner, do you think it's a good idea to maintain in their base training year round, to maintain some level of intensity? Or are you of the school of thought that you should just keep it easy during your base training and bring intensity in as you sharpen?
So I would say the first part, you don't want to do intensity year round. There's got to be some time off. And that is something I struggle with. I'm guilty of with the seasons blurring together pretty quickly. But it is important to not be doing year-round intensity. So having that base is great. In terms of when that intensity, the higher end intensity that we're talking about, when that happens, it does really depend on what you're trying to peak for. And the same concept applies to anything. You want to go from generally less specific to more specific. So if you're racing a 10K road race or a half marathon, as you get close to that race, that's what you're focusing on, that higher end speed. For 10K for sure, that's like VO2 max effort. The thing about ultra running that's interesting is that more specific is slower. So you're not doing that high end right before the race. So you want to do it at some point, and that's where, different coaches will say different things, but it makes sense to push it further down in the training block. So you might have a base period, a little bit of building, and then you focus on the top end for a bit. And that also for running is a good opportunity to work on speed. And then you have that, and then you start kind of backing off the pace, but increasing the duration. that's, I think, how I think a lot of coaches would recommend. There's different ways to do it, but again, it seems backwards until you think of it as getting more specific.
I want to take a quick moment to tell you about a product that I think will help you nail your next marathon or ultra marathon. To succeed in these kinds of events, you need to build a lot of endurance, you need to build your economy and your speed. And what better way to learn how to do that than to receive training recommendations and workout recommendations on a daily basis from world-class pros, from people who have been there and done that. These are the people who win these races and have excelled in this field. So Tracer was designed to bring you these workout recommendations from these pros at a fraction of the cost of traditional one-on-one coaching. And the way it works is that Tracer goes out to these coaches and harvests a ton of data, all kinds of situations and workout recommendations for these various situations. We then create an AI module that acts as a stand-in. It acts as a proxy coach that you can report how you feel every day. You can report what your schedule changes might be. And just as if you were talking to that coach, it makes adaptive workout training recommendations and completely adjusts to what you need as you go. I personally have used this system for multiple races and I keep getting faster. And admittedly, I'm biased because I am one of the founders of the company, but it truly does work. It's worked great for me. It's worked great for the other people who have used it. Check it out at tracerfitness.com. We offer a 14-day free trial, so there's really no risk for you to go play around. Just cancel if you decide it's not for you. I think you'll love it. I personally love it and use it to train and am getting way better. I nailed my first 100-miler this last fall using Tracer. I nailed my recent ski mountaineering race, and it works. So check it out, tracerfitness.com. Right. So to summarize that, if I'm going into a 100-mile race in the fall, I would start my season doing more speed development, get faster, get those neuromuscular adaptations going. And as I get closer and closer, increase volume to the point where running 100 miles is possible and the legs have as much time on feet and mileage and all of that as you go in, because that is the specific part, as you pointed out. Whereas if you're going to a fast race, like a 10K, half marathon, maybe even a marathon, you would start with high volume, work your way into the speed. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's, again, there's multiple ways to do it, but I think that's the way that a lot of coaches and what makes the most sense. And either way, you're probably going to be better off than a lot of athletes because you're actually, if you're periodizing like that, you have some focus and you're allowing your body to adapt to not just throwing everything at it at once.
So let's say you're going into a long race and you do you keep any speed and intensity going into, say, a long ultra marathon of 50 miles or more? Do you keep any speed? Are you doing one workout a week? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, the level of trail running has got to the point where I feel like things don't really start to slow down much until it's like 100 miles in the mountains. So those 50 milers, 100K is like probably still going to have some fast miles.
Mm-hmm.
I have definitely learned the importance of finding some speed. I don't have naturally super fast running economy, but that's easy to throw in some strides, and it's not a workout, but you keep up that little bit of neuromuscular stimulus. But I do like doing workouts, like I said, a lot of the year. So even if I'm heading into something really big, I'm probably still going to be doing intensity, yeah, once a week, except for maybe my biggest like 2 weeks where I'm just going to focus on volume and maybe some longer runs I'm going to push a little bit let that be kind of race prep. Where typically, yeah, like I said, on my easy runs, my easy workouts, I'm going really nice and chill. As I'm getting closer to a race, again, being more specific is like, I'm going to go push a little bit on a 4 hour run. And if you do that, you're probably not doing intervals the rest of the week. Like, it's pretty taxing.
How much do you think the high intensity plays a role in muscular endurance to keep your legs durable enough for, say, a long ultra marathon in the mountains? There's the idea of these faster workouts are metabolically important to clear lactate, use lactate, deal with overload of lactate in your blood. But then there's also this other side of it, which is, man, my calves are so sore from that fast workout I did. My hips are so sore from pushing it up the hill for 4 minutes at a time. Those kinds
Yeah.
of things where it's a muscular adaptation. How do you see that? What's the value in those for both short and long races?
Yeah, I think again, it depends on what you're talking about. I think for a short race, like if people are doing Cirque Series races, then yeah, you want to be used to pushing fast up a mountain and down fast down a mountain because that's what that is all about. I think if you're doing ultras, you don't need to use your intensity to get muscular endurance. The muscular endurance is going to come from the time, the vertical, and maybe some strength training. Um, that said, I have the perspective of someone that lives in the mountains. So it's easy, like I said, I go up for a 4 hour long run and go rack up vert and do some big downhills. But I don't think I need to go push it up the climbs for the muscular endurance standpoint. When I'm pushing higher intensity, that's more from an aerobic training standpoint. I think if you lived in Ohio, which there are runners that Arlen Glick has
Yeah.
a 200-foot hill that he does reps on, and that's a little different scenario where if you got to make use of what you're working with, and if that's not a lot, it might make more sense to do some intensity with that focus of muscular endurance.
So if you're doing one workout a week going into an ultra marathon, let's say, what does that one workout a week look like when you're 4 months out? And what does that one workout a week look like when you're 3 weeks out?
So, I mean, 4 months out, that's kind of almost like where I'm at right now, even though I'm not sure what I'm doing this fall. But I probably have some shorter races on the schedule if I'm 4 months out from a 100-mile race. Um, so that's, the racing is a good way to practice the fueling, get a really big stimulus, and also is going to motivate training a little bit. So I'm probably training with that in mind, in terms of intensity, but also looking further down the road. Like I said, yeah, as I get closer to, if I have no more races till a 100-mile race and I'm just doing a block for that, um, I'm probably just going to be doing zone 3 threshold, which is, I think, I think it's really important, and I also think it's kind of my sweet spot where I know I can handle a pretty high load. I could do, maybe an hour of intensity time and still recover from it fine as long as I'm fueling, um, and be able to just, keep taking along throughout the week. So yeah, it's fun. It's finding the balance of adding in that intensity, so you're not flat, and so that you're continuing to challenge yourself. But I don't want to do anything that's really costly. So I'm not going to go hammer short intervals where I'm going to be like totally wiped. And in zone 3, I'm going to make sure that I'm like really staying controlled.
Let's flip it on its end. So we've been talking about moving into an ultra marathon. Let's talk about moving into a short race then, either a schemo race or short road race or something like that.
Hmm.
Does your volume come down? Because if you're going from like less specific to more specific, you're moving from, maybe a larger block of volume, doing a lot of easy running, many hours out there. Does your time of training go down when you move into those shorter events? Or does your volume stay high going into those events, but more of it becomes higher intensity? How does that look?
I think naturally as you increase the intensity, you should be decreasing your volume if you've been training at a relatively high load for yourself. Otherwise, if you just start racking up intensity without lowering the volume, you're probably going to get really tired, unless you weren't doing enough previously. Um, Personally, it is a bit of a balance for me because in the wintertime is when I'm skimo racing. Like I said, I'm taking advantage of training a little bit more higher end, higher intensity. But it's ski season. I want to go out for big backcountry skis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a bit of a balance.
It's a common problem here in Utah with
Yeah,
their skimo racers.
it is, and it probably looks a lot different than someone that lives not in a snowy place, and maybe they're like doing training for a 5K in the winter, and then like for sure their volume's going to go down. They're just doing some speed and enjoying other things in life, which is great. Um, I think that what keeps that in check for me is in the wintertime, I'm super busy with work as a coach. Um, so there's some weeks where like I just end up way cutting down my volume, and then it's like I think maybe even though I don't love that having to happen, it probably is helpful as I'm trying to balance this like doing shorter races, doing higher intensity, but like I said, I also want to go ski powder.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that staying on top of your nutrition as you do workouts, and you mentioned that you can go out and run at threshold for an hour or something, and as long as you're fueling well and giving your body the resources it needs, your recovery goes pretty well. That's obviously a trend over the last few years in ultra marathon running in general, just pounding the carbs and the sodium and the hydration, right?
Hmm.
And I think we started seeing that with roads in the Breaking Two, where they were really focusing on how to get that energy in. It's been a growing trend. What's your take on how to fuel correctly? What advice would you give to an everyday person who's going to go out and do maybe a marathon up to 100 miler? What does Adam Loomis think they should be doing in terms of race day nutrition and practicing and fueling during their training?
Well, practicing is probably the most important thing, and I think that's something that people tend to miss out on. Like they go out and whether you're with friends or you're doing this cool adventure and like food is not a priority. Like again, here when you're backcountry skiing, like you're cold, you're you got other things to worry about. So you're not like, oh, I'm taking down 3 gels an hour. Um, but there's no way they expect to be able to go race where the intensity is higher, you're hotter the whole time, um, and suddenly be able to cram down fuel. So that's probably the simplest thing. And the best thing about that is if you're fueling your training, then you can train more because you're recovering faster. I think when I was growing up, like the sports nutrition was all about getting the protein, the carbs after workouts. And that was like, that's still important, but that was like the only thing they talked about. And if you're only working out for an hour, that's probably fine. But as in the worlds we're in, like if that's all you're doing, you're just not going to be able to handle as much. You're going to be tired. And yeah, I've noticed a huge difference myself and throughout the whole sport when you're fueling consistently through your training, not just after and before.
What would you say to somebody who's training for an ultra marathon who thinks that, and I've asked this question to a few coaches and athletes here on the podcast, and I like to ask the same question to different people to kind of get a consensus or not on a particular topic, but on the idea of like under fueling as part of your training. It used to be, I mean, I remember when Uphill Athlete was saying, hey, fasted training is the best, right?
Hmm.
And Killian Jornet posts, stuff about long zone 2. And for him, long zone 2 is like a big deal, right? Without eating anything. And there's these glamorous videos of Killian running through the mountains with nothing but wildflowers and glacier water to eat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's this idea that like, wow, the world's best mountain runner has some part of him that still believes in fasted training. Is that debunked at this point, or does and I don't know Killian and I haven't talked to him, so I couldn't say if he still believes that. I know Uphill Athlete has totally changed their perspective on it. A reversed course. It seems to be a dying philosophy, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, first with Killian, like, I've got sucked into that too, but at the same time, like, no person outside of Killian should ever look at what he's doing and think that's a good idea. And I know he's very open with his training, and at one point I was reading, and he outlined his whole season, and he had like a week of gut training, and then he was good to race and smash 90 grams of carbs an hour through all UTMB. And like, so he's a freak on a lot of levels. Um, I think generally the science is that if you're putting in, the higher or really mid volume above, like I think I've heard 12, 15 hours a week, you're getting so much um, fat burning training that you're getting that adaptation whether you're fueling or not, or like even if you're fueling high carb while you're training. Because again, if you're training 15 hours a week, that means probably 12 of it is at that easy fat burning pace where your body is becoming efficient. So there isn't a huge need. Um, I think that like everything, that periodization can be used, and I think you can get away with play around a little bit for some people with doing a little bit lower carb training at times, farther away from a goal race. And there might be some benefits, especially for someone that isn't training really high volume. But that's, maybe 1, 2 runs a week. Um, it's not, this is an all in, like, yeah, I think the like keto style, we're going to be just purely fat adapted, is there's maybe a couple people out there that it works for, but by and large gone by the wayside. And I even think it's got to the point where you probably don't need to do any fat adapted training, any fasted training. I think some of the best runners in the world are, and probably schemo athletes are fueling all the time. And like I said, then they can just train more.
I got metabolically tested a few years ago with an RER test. And
Hmm.
for those listening that don't know what an RER test is, it's a gas exchange test. So you wear a mask, they measure you increase your intensity, your heart rate comes up over time, and it measures how much carbon dioxide and oxygen how much oxygen goes in, how much carbon dioxide comes out. This is how they measure VO2 max. And what I saw in my results was that my fat burn came up immediately when I started moving. And it kind of went up to, for me, I'll just tell you what the details were. I burned about a gram of fat. That's 8 to 9 calories of fat calories per minute. And it comes up to 1, and then it just stays there for the rest of, as I increase intensity, I'm always burning 1 gram of fat. And then to compensate for the increase in intensity, the sugar just keeps coming up. And eventually you're running so fast that the sugar overwhelms the percentage of energy being burned. And but to your point, the reason I bring that up is, to your point, you're still burning the same amount of fat, whether you're going really easy, whether you're going really hard. The amount of sugar changes, obviously. If you're going really easy, less sugar gets burned. But I think it's interesting, just kind of as an anecdote from my data, it aligns with what you're saying, that the fat burn is still there. You don't lose the fat burn just because you're going at whatever pace you are. It kind of just stays there, and then you at least for me, it did. How many like on the topic of how much for Adam Loomis, how many carbs an hour do you like to consume when you're racing? And maybe give us two answers. What would you do in a fast schema race versus a 50-mile plus ultra marathon?
In a schema race, if I have the time for it, I think in schema that becomes a challenge. It's not so much your gut, it's you're either hammering up a mountain or you're transitioning or you're hammering down a mountain. That said, yeah, you can take in a lot. Your gut can handle a lot. So I'm usually shooting for like about 100 grams an hour.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I've been able to do that in most races. There's usually some time on the skin track, especially if you're with a group where you're like, all right, I can take a quick gel. And the bigger gel packs are, 40 grams of carbs. If you can just get that down real quick, that's great. Um, and then I don't take it down that much as things get longer, until I'm looking at, yeah, that like 100-mile. Really, once things are over 12 hours, it becomes more challenging on the body. Um, and I think for me, I need a little more training to where I've got training to where I could be confident in 100 grams an hour for a 100-mile race. But I think if I'm getting over 80, I'm still in a pretty good place where at the intensity I'm at, that should be replenishing the majority of what I'm burning.
Do you think the amount of carbs should correlate with the intensity that you're running? Most amateur runners aren't able to maintain a pace that's going to burn really a lot of, like, 100 grams an hour.
Hmm.
They may not be capable of doing that. They're running slower where their energy burn is lower. Would you say just no, if your stomach can handle it, put it in, or would you say try to match your effort with the number of carbs?
Yeah, I think it should be relative to effort, and I do think that's one of those things where the the top end figures that you're hearing from elites, um, isn't as applicable to everyone because, like I said, the top end of the field in even 100-mile races, they're like high zone two for the entire race and sometimes zone three for parts of it, obviously not a huge amount. So they are burning a lot of calories and can utilize that fuel. If you're out, um, and also it's time relative too, right? So the average person doing Wasatch 100 might take 28 hours. So they're walking a lot of it. There's no chance you're taking down that much fuel and needing that much fuel. Um, so again, it's one of those things where I think what the elites are doing has helped everyone be aware of like, okay, this is important. This is something all of us can improve on, but it's not necessarily applicable to someone that's maybe hiking the majority of the race. And yeah, maybe it's 200, 250 calories an hour. That used to be like viewed as the gold standard. So
Right,
still a good amount.
right. Let's talk quickly about sodium.
Hmm.
What's your take on how much sodium? I know that's a very individual number. I've been tested myself. Many of my friends have now been tested, and we're all over the board when it comes to how much sodium we lose in our sweat per liter of sweat.
Hmm.
Precision hydration has done a lot of work in that field of kind of, providing test equipment to people to get tested. What's your take on how much sodium you like to pull in and advice you'd have for people?
Yeah, I haven't actually been tested. So I am going more on trial and error. And I know I'm not a terribly salty person. I don't tend to sweat. I'm probably on the average to low side of sweating.
Hmm.
Um, so I found that like in that 500 milligrams of sodium per liter, um, is usually enough. Um, but yeah, I do think that this is going to be maybe the next frontier where everyone is getting a sweat test. Everyone is realizing, okay, this is what I need. And it's probably an area, yeah, I need to explore as well too as I try to dial everything in. Because yeah, you're gonna have some tough times if you're just going by trial and error. But at the same time, that's how it used to be, and people still manage to run pretty fast.
Yeah, yeah, and you can learn a lot by trial and error as long as you know what you're trying and what you're getting out of it, right? A lot
Yeah.
of times people aren't really trying, they don't really know.
Hmm.
I have friends, they get out on these really long runs, we get back to the car, they're sick, they don't want to drink any water. It's like they're blown up, and I say, "How much sodium did you have throughout the run?" And we've been out in the sun for 5 hours, 6 hours, and they can't answer that question. They don't even know. And you don't have a trial and error if you're doing that, right? You
Yeah.
got to know how much you're putting in and say, does that feel right? Do I feel good on that? And some people are going to need, I have a buddy who's a great ultra marathon runner. He's doing, 3 salt capsules, those little, salt stick capsules, 3 of those per bottle, plus a little bit in his gels, and that's a half-liter bottle, so really 6 salt pills per liter is what he's doing. And people used to think he was nuts. I was like, wow, that's so much. Well, he got salt tested and he was on the money.
Yeah.
And it turns out we have the exact same sodium loss in our sweat, and so that's on the order of what I need to do. I talk to people like Max King, and it's like almost a non-issue because I think he's more like you, where he's not losing that much, so it's not as top of mind as it is for somebody like me. I know if I don't get that right, I start to feel terrible. I've had multiple experiences where I've gotten too low on sodium and just it's been miserable. Terrible. My worst races were that's what was going on. And yet some people seem to get by almost without even worrying about it. And I think it's probably because they're not losing very much. Anecdotal, my take on it as well, but interesting to get your thoughts that for you it sounds like you've dialed it, but you're on the low side.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say 100%. I think it is, like I said, it's something I can still improve on.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so we've talked about the trends of sodium and carbs, and hydration goes along with that sodium, obviously. What are some other trends that you're seeing in the sport that you see as very promising? Things that you've experimented with, where you're like, "Yeah, we're learning as a group here how to do this better."
I'd say there's two things. I think the first one is that speed does matter for ultra running. Speed work specifically. Um, and that's something that when I first got into the sport, I was like, this is great. I'm never gonna run on a track. Like I'm gonna run on the mountains every day, and like maybe I'll run on the road to get to the trail. Um, and I've learned that okay, you don't you get good at trail running by running on trails, but you don't necessarily get really efficient with your running by running on trails all the time. For me, yeah, I'm pretty good at the technical, varied style of running. I'm not as good at just maybe it turns to a service road and you're just grinding at the same effort level for 2 miles. So that's where the speed work, the flatter running, and it's something I've seen from a variety of athletes, especially like the short course, like Cirque Series style, Golden Trail Series athletes. That are climbing at insane rates. They're doing a lot of their intensity dead flat and they're really fast.
Wow.
So there's that. I will say what I still think it is relative to you. So David Roach, who's extremely successful athlete and coach, he likes to say that like if you go to a 10K before a 100 miler, that's going to determine the field. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense because otherwise, we'd just be 10K runners. And I know that from my perspective, I beat a lot of people in long races that would crush me in a 10K. But I think the point more is not about how fast are you relative to your competition. I think the point more is you're going to get faster by making yourself faster, whatever that is. It's like somewhat low hanging fruit.
Does this go does this fly in the face of the previous concept though that we've talked about around moving from general to specific? Because keeping your speed
Mm,
up going into an ultra marathon would be very non-specific. You're never going to run at your lactate threshold going into an ultra like a 100 miler. At least I'm certainly not. going to hit my lactate threshold, that'd be probably pretty dangerous for me.
Yeah.
And yet what you're mentioning here is this trend towards more speed development for even 100 milers. You mentioned
Hmm.
Roach set the record at Leadville, went on to win Javelina, and both faster
Yeah.
100 miler race. Um, but yeah, does that kind of contradict the concept of going from general to specific?
Um, I would say the way I would design a year, I would say no in terms of what your workouts are. So, but you can keep up speed. Like speed is a neuromuscular thing largely. So if you're going out and doing a 20-second stride, like that shouldn't be exhausting you, even if you're doing 8 of them. So you can keep doing that year round. Yeah, maybe, and this is something, yeah, maybe if I wasn't so busy skiing all winter time, I would like actually be on the track in the winter time,
Mm.
where that is the workout. So that fits right in there where you're doing that less specific for ultra. You're doing track work in the wintertime before the season. And then, but you're not totally forgetting about it with just some real short bursts. But that's not taking away from your training. It's just a little bit to keep it fresh.
Yeah, it's the idea of the muscular adaptations rather than the metabolic adaptations.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some trends that you're seeing in in trail running and endurance sports where you're not sold on it, where you're like maybe skeptical or your experience hasn't aligned with what the trend is portraying?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think on the extreme end of that spectrum, David's idea of like this is the only thing that determines who's winning. I think there's so many factors that pick any one thing and you're not going to be able to pull out the variable that determines who's winning the race. And that's what's interesting about, I think, ultra running in particular, is there's so many different variables from your economy to your ability to handle fuel and your durability and your mental game, all these different things. So I think anytime anyone is too focused on just, this is the predictor, it's it's like, well, what you see what happens the next day, and sometimes you can't often you can't really, put a pin in what makes that person be the winner because it is so varied.
Yeah, to join you in that criticism of just this, because it's a general concept that you hear in coaching a lot. People say the better your top end, the better your maximum, the less strenuous your sub maximum is, the better, the more efficient you'll be at sub maximum.
Hmm.
But that doesn't work for weightlifters, right? There's guys who could squat 600 pounds that play football, but you ask them to, jog 1 mile and, they're not going to be able to do anything close to what you could do, but
Right,
they're going to beat you on max squat, right? Even at the
right.
same body weight. The other exaggeration that I would bring in is like, why isn't Usain Bolt the best ultra marathon runner? If he's the fastest sprinter, shouldn't he be at like 10% of his overall speed running, Wasatch 100 or UTMB or something, and just go out and beat everybody? So I think that argument of like max strength and what percentage of your max strength you're going to go out for your endurance seems to be a misnomer to me. That's just, I guess an opinion over here that nobody cares what Joey thinks, but that there's some holes in that, as you've pointed out, and I certainly agree with that. Anything else that you see in trail running or in endurance sports where you're kind of like, yeah, everybody's saying that, but I don't buy it?
um I don't know. I think I keep seeing people become more and more dialed and paying attention to the science, and I'm losing that edge that I came in with just a few years ago of actually understanding training theory. Now it's like whatever, my buddies that are engineers and never had the coaching background that I had are starting to pick up on these things. So there's not a ton that really comes to mind. Um, at least, yeah, in the world I'm in, I'm not seeing anything too too wild that I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But I'm sure there'll be something latest and greatest.
Well, I'm an engineer, and I don't think I pose any threat to you anytime soon, Adam. So,
Well, there's some pretty fast engineers out there.
yeah. Well, it reminds me of the guy who took second in UTMB last year, right? The Hoka employee.
He won.
Uh, oh yeah, excuse me. Yeah,
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 he won. He won.
yeah.
I was thinking of the yeah, I forgot his name. That took second to Killian 2 years ago. Had a great race. I think he was a
Yeah.
French guy.
Yep.
But yeah, so the engine is he an engineer from Hoka? I don't know a lot
Yeah, he's
about
a
him, and
shoe
I'm
product
gonna
developer. Yeah.
shoe product developer. Yeah, and just blasted everybody. I mean, what a cool story. I haven't really followed him, and I haven't seen if he's had further success, or maybe he's going to be back at UTMB this year, and we'll find out. But
He'll be back at States, or not back. He'll be at States, which is like lining up to be the iconic men's race of the decade. Yeah,
yeah,
he's part of that.
excellent. Yeah, and there's as you're pointing out, there are so many people who are learning the science, they're paying attention to it, and it's like so many people that haven't won races before show up and are extremely competitive or even win, kind of out of nowhere or at a very very quick rise in the sport, let's say.
Yeah.
Do you think that road runners, like we're looking, Des Linden, for example, just retired from, she just ran her last Boston Marathon. She's been an incredibly fast female marathon runner for how many years? Won Boston in 2018, I think, when it was terrible weather. She has the grit to kind of push through and win races like that, where everybody else just drops out or can't hang. And she's said that she's coming into trail and ultra marathons, which I think is so exciting to watch. Like, I can't wait to watch the first race, to follow the first race with Des Linden. Do you think there's something to this idea of like going from a really fast background in flat running? I mean, you've already kind of alluded to it, but should those be the people we watch out for, or do you think they're going to come from within the sport itself in trails?
I mean, I think what's interesting about ultra running is one of the things that's interesting is you see people from a variety of backgrounds. Certainly in the US, a lot of our top athletes have come from a road background. Um, and yeah, there's a certain benefit of having that running economy that you've been working on your whole life instead of being like in your 30s or older and then being like, oh, maybe I should start thinking about doing strides. They've been doing it. It's been ingrained in them. Um, so yeah, for sure. I think we're going to keep seeing a lot of that, but I don't think I think we're going to continue to see people come from other sports, more of a mountain background, or cycling, whatever it is, because there's also a lot of people out there that have these big aerobic bases that they're looking for a new avenue. Um, versus the true road runner, they're super, super fit and really good at running. They might actually not have like as many hours in them as somebody that comes from triathlon or Nordic skiing. Um, so I don't think they're going to take over the sport, but Des Linden will be fun to watch.
Absolutely. Certainly the future of our sport and the people that are going to be winning are kids that are like the Adam Loomises of 7 years old that love their cross country skis. And I know that you have been a big part of the very successful, I would say, Utah skimo scene. You've coached a lot of these kids, and some of our kids here from Utah are going on to the international scene and winning beating the Europeans at their own game in skimo. tell us a little bit about what you've seen in Utah Schemo and your participation in building, some of our youth. Not just in, maybe talk about the Schemo scene here because that's interesting, but generalize it to just how we can help our kids to love this sport and to grow and to be smashing the records that are being set today. They're going to get smashed again in 10, 15 years when these kids get older.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it started in the two main programs in Utah Park City that I'm a part of, as well as Silver Fork, which is really has a ton of momentum, a really big group. They both just started as really grassroots, parents that like to backcountry ski and kids that like to play around in the mountains. And so it's just given them an opportunity to continue to do that, and then also have an avenue from an athletic standpoint and a community, like you touched on. The the Utah Schemo community is pretty incredible. The amount of people, 200 people that show up to go race around in the dark
Mm-hmm.
on a Tuesday night in the wintertime, with no official scoring or anything. And that's totally rubbed off on the kids where, I think they can take it as seriously as they want to. And if they want to just be out there to get better at ski touring, then they can do that. If they want to try to be world champions, like we've seen come out of Utah, then they now have that structure, and then also like the belief that, oh wow, we can do this because they're doing it together.
Absolutely. I love that. I think I look at my own kids and times that I've ruined them from endurance sports. Like my younger son wanted to go for a run one night, and I was like, "Great, let's go! I can't wait." And he ran 3 miles. He was just a little, I think he was 8 or 9 years old, and we went on a trail run, and he kept saying like, "I don't want to stop until we get back to the car." Like that was his goal. Like, don't stop running. And we're running up some, Utah trails that have some steep sections up and down. And he kind of started getting into it, and then I would go for a run and I'd be like, oh yeah, let's just get to the top of that hill. And I kind of made it about the endurance, right? About the sport, the way I think about it. And he kind of lost interest. And I wish I would have gone back and done exactly what you just said, which is uh, kids need to have fun. They need to go out there and just truly enjoy what they're doing. Sometimes for some of them, it's just they have a great social outlet to be with people and doing something cool. Some of them are going to be like, yeah, I want to go to the top of the hill. I want to buckle down on my fitness. That's what drives me. I'm going to Europe to race, right? And but the attachment to the sport really happens when they find the fun in it, and that's why we should all be doing this. Um, what advice would you have as a final question for you? What advice would you have for somebody who's trying to build a community of kids out there? Maybe it's in trail running, maybe it's in road running, maybe it's schemo. I know there's probably a lot of people looking up to you and to Silver Fork and to the Utah schemo scene. I know Max King has been trying to get a schemo scene going in Bend, Oregon now with his youth. He's got a few kids that he's getting out there. I know he's really jealous of what's going on here and really, appreciates it. Jealous in a good way. That's what I mean. But what advice would you give to those people who are building those communities?
I mean, it definitely takes some patience, and things don't happen overnight. Nor is it always just like everything a straight line. That's something I've seen in youth sports is you have waves and you have groups that gain a lot of momentum, and then um, and they grow stronger, and kids stay in the sport because there's more of them. And then you have cycles, and so it's just, yeah, providing the opportunities, and um, trying to bring the right people in to make it fun, and then yeah, things build from there. I think, yeah, Sarah at Silver Fork has has this group that's a lot of really competitive racers, but all probably the ones that aren't competitive, they're still like they're all just having fun together. And they have a lot of girls. That's one thing on our side that we got to find, because I think the more young girls you can bring into the sport, that brings in more young girls, and it also keeps the boys in it when they start to be teenagers. So I
And
haven't quite
so,
figured out the secret to that, to get to doing that, but I do know that's important.
and some of those girls are so good. I mean, when I race the powder keg and, a bunch
Oh
of
yeah.
these 16-year-old girls go blowing past me, and it's like, man, these kids are fast. They're good at this. And their transitions, like it's insane. They go out there and they practice and they get the details right on the technique. And yeah, it's really cool to watch. Uh, yeah, thanks so much, Adam, for this conversation. We've learned a lot about how you found success in so many diverse efforts in short races, long races. It's so good to pick your brain on how people should be training and what your thoughts are on those things. If you're listening to this and you enjoyed the conversation, please share it with somebody. Please rate it, subscribe, like, comment, whatever else out there. Those kinds of things really do help us to have more of these conversations. And so if you like it, definitely share it and help us spread the word. Also, if you have questions or if you have topics that you would like to hear discussed, send us an email. It's info@tracerfitness.com, and let us know what you want to hear about and what your ideas are. Also, be sure to check out Tracer at tracerfitness.com. We have a really unique adaptive training program platform that allows you to get ready for these events in a really accurate way that helps you to apply a lot of what Adam's talking about here in terms of when to do certain workouts and under what context and what's your schedule like and when is your goal event. That's what Tracer's all about. And so definitely check it out, tracerfitness.com. Let us know how we can help you nail your goals. Adam, thanks again so much for sharing your wisdom, and appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always fun to get into the weeds a little bit.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.